Welcome to SWAYAM course of Microbial Technology. Myself, Ms. Shilpi Banerjee, Assistant Professor in Chhattisgarh Swami Vivekanand Technical University. I will be today discussing about heterotrophs. As you have seen that the topics which was discussed in the previous lecture was introduction to autotrophs, features of different autotrophs, types of autotrophs, examples with some pictorial representations, heterotrophs in food chain, their importance, and finally the summary. Now, in today's lecture, the topics which will be discussed include as follows: introduction to heterotrophs, types of heterotrophs based on different source, examples with pictorial representation, heterotrophs in food chain, importance and summary. So, moving on with the main content of heterotroph. So, students, you all know that heterotrophs are organisms that do not produce their food and depend on other organisms for their food and energy. The term heterotroph is actually composed of two words. Okay? One is hetero, which means others, and troph means food, indicating that these organisms depend on other organisms for their food and survival. Heterotroph is an organism which requires organic compound for its principal source of food. It is an organism that requires organic substrates to get its carbon for growth and development. It basically depends either directly or indirectly on autotrophs for nutrients and food energy. By consuming reduced carbon compounds, heterotrophs are able to use all the energy that they consume for growth, reproduction and other biological functions. Some examples of heterotrophs include we, human beings, cows, snakes, ants, mosquitoes and many others. Heterotrophs survive by feeding on organic matter produced by or available in other organisms. So, basically as they feed on other organisms, they are also called consumers in the ecosystem as they consume food prepared by autotrophs and other form of higher trophic levels in the food chain. A heterotroph is an organism whose sustenance comes from other organism. Every food chain basically begins first with an autotroph. So, we have already discussed in previous lecture what is autotroph. Autotrophs are those which makes it food selfly own and for energy, and this series ends with heterotroph. Heterotrophs are important in the ecosystem as these make up a lot of biomass and are responsible for transfer of energy and biomass through the food chain. Heterotrophs can be classified as different types of consumers as primary, secondary and tertiary consumers. Heterotrophs also make up the decomposers in the food chain that feed on the dead and decaying biomass in the environment. They play a very important role in the ecosystem because basically they recycle the nutrients back into the ecosystem. Different group of heterotrophs have different complexities and systems that enable them to acquire energy and food from autotrophs. Heterotrophs cannot make their own food, so they must eat it or absorb it. For this reason, heterotrophs are also known as consumers. So, consumers include all the animals and fungi and many other protists and bacteria. They may consume autotrophs or other heterotrophs or organic molecules from other organisms. Heterotrophs show great diversity and may appear far more fascinating than producers. But heterotrophs are limited by our utter dependence on those autotrophs that originally made our food. If plants, algae and autotrophic bacteria vanished from earth, animals, fungi and other heterotrophs would soon disappear as well. So, you can understand what will the scenario will be in an ecosystem. all life requires a constant input of energy. Only autotrophs can transform that ultimate solar source into the chemical energy in food that powers life. As you must have clearly understood that heterotrophs cannot make their own food. So, as mentioned earlier, they need to eat it or absorb it. So, basically they are consumers. A food chain in which the role of autotrophs and heterotroph can be seen is shown in this pictorial representation. So, what is food chain? A food chain basically shows how energy and matter flows from producers to consumers. Matter is recycled, but energy must keep flowing constantly into the system. Food chain carry energy from producers, which are none other than autotrophs, to consumer, which are heterotroph. 99% of energy for life comes from the sun via the process of photosynthesis. Now, heterotrophic nutrition is a type of nutrition in which organisms rely on other organisms for nutrition either directly or indirectly. The organisms that allow heterotrophic nutrition or that basically follow heterotrophic nutrition are known as heterotroph. As they are incapable of preparing their own food, they obtain it from other organisms. All heterotrophs except blood and gut parasites convert complex nutrients into simple compounds via the process of digestion that can be absorbed and utilized by the cells. The soluble products of digestion are then broken down for energy release and other developmental processes required. Now, let us look on to the different types of heterotrophs based on nutrition. So, as you can see, the types of heterotroph on the basis of nutrition, heterotrophs are basically divided into three categories: saprophytic nutrition, parasitic nutrition and holozoic nutrition. So, looking into the details, saprophytic nutrition is basically where the organisms obtain nutrients from dead and decaying organic matter. The digestive process includes dissolving complex organic materials into less complex organic nutrients outside their body by releasing their digestive juices. Then the organism's cell membrane absorbs the digested nutrients. During the process of saprophytic nutrition, proteins, lipids and carbohydrates are broken down into less complex molecules that can be easily absorbed by the organism. So, basically fungi such as yeast and certain different types of bacteria are very common examples of saprophytes, which is shown in this pictorial representation. Moving on to the second type, that is parasitic nutrition. Parasites, we all know that organisms which feed on others, which feed on simple nutrients from the body of another organism, which are known as the host and cause harm to it. So, these organisms can be external or internal. Few examples of parasite are Ascaris, which are basically, I hope you know, they are roundworms, right. So, they live in the human gut causing ascariasis. Simotha exugia is a rare parasite that is also known as tongue eating louse because it lives in the mouth of the marine fish Lithognathus. So, parasites are completely dependent on their host organisms for their survival. There are two types of parasite, ectoparasite and endoparasite. Endoparasite are those that infect the host body internally like tapeworms, ascaris, etc. Moving on to the next type of heterotroph, which is based on holozoic nutrition. It is basically a type of heterotrophic nutrition in which complex food is consumed by the body and processed internally, where simple nutrients are absorbed by the body after digestion, whereas undigested substances are expelled out from the body. So, most vertebrate species as well as single celled creatures like Paramecium, amoeba usually exhibit this type of nourishment. Holozoic nutrition is observed in herbivores, carnivores and omnivores as well as detrivores. Now, let us see what is herbivore. So, herbivore, as the name suggests, those organisms which feed on herbs. So, basically they are none other than plant eating heterotrophic organisms which occupy the second tier of food chain. They feed on organic matter like living plants such as sedges, trees, grasses, flowering plants and bushes. Carnivores and omnivores include: carnivores eat meat, meaning they eat other heterotrophs. Omnivore eat both plants and meat, and both these type of heterotrophs occupy the third level of food chain. Moving on to the detrivores, they occupy the second level of food chain because they feed on decaying organic material such as dead plant and animals and even the fecal matter of different animals. Now, let us look onto the types of heterotrophs based on the energy source. Initially, we have discussed types of heterotrophs based on nutrition. Now, we will be discussing how the heterotrophs are classified based on the energy source. So, number one is photoheterotrophs. Photoheterotroph or heterotrophic phototrophs are a group of living beings that derive their energy from solar energy, but actually they depend on autotroph only for their food and survival. Example of photoheterotrophic organisms include purple non-sulfur bacteria, green non-sulfur bacteria and heliobacteria. These microorganisms are ubiquitous in aquatic habitats. They occupy unique niche species and contribute to global biogeochemical cycling. The second type is chemoheterotroph. So, they are heterotrophs that obtain their energy from chemical compounds and consume food produced by autotrophs. Most the examples include most animal and fungi are chemoheterotrophs. They are the larger group of heterotrophs which include organisms from all domain. So, they are essential for the normal functioning of an ecosystem, as these organisms take up organic material from plants and other autotrophs and cycle them through the food web. Now, let us look on to the third type of classification of heterotrophs, which is based on the electron source. So, the number one is organotrophs. So, what is organotroph? They are nothing but heterotroph which utilize organic compound for energy as well as food. They derive energy from the oxidation of organic compounds via internal respiration. In organotrophs, the organic compound acts as the source of an electron, right? Because these classifications are based on the electron source. So, on the basis of source of electron, they are classified, which then passes through the electron transport chain to produce ATPs. Organotrophs include all animals and some bacteria. The organotropic bacteria can be aerobic or anaerobic. Now, let us look on to the second type based on electron source, that is lithotrophs. So, lithotrophs are heterotrophs that utilize inorganic compounds or geological process as their source of electrons. The most common inorganic compounds that are used as electron sources include elemental sulfur and elemental gases. Most lithotrophs are smaller bacteria, as the inorganic compounds do not produce enough energy. Like in the case of larger organic sugars, these can oxidize electron donors to produce electrons that are then channeled into electron respiratory channels to form ATP. The only non-lithotropic organism are unicellular organisms. However, some multicellular organisms might also obtain energy from symbiotic relationship with the other unicellular organisms. Mostly lithotropes are found in areas like sea floors or underground water sources where chemical food sources are present. Now, let us look on to the some examples of heterotrophs. The very common is fungi. They are a group of eukaryotes that depend on dead and decaying matter for their food as well as energy. They are organoheterotrophic organisms that use complex organic compounds as their electron source. Fungi make up the decomposers in the food chain, where they consume dead and decaying organisms and release simpler molecules so that it can be utilized by the autotrophs. They are mainly found in dry and arid environments, and these also occur in the soil where mostly dead and decaying components are located. There is a large number of fungal species that can be aerobic or anaerobic, and depending on the availability of oxygen, these produce different levels of energy from organic compounds. Mushrooms are also heterotrophs, that is, they cannot perform photosynthesis, but they feed on the organic matter. Chemical energy and useful materials are obtained from the digestion of substrates. Fungi are versatile in producing lytic enzymes active on many types of chemical bonds. Without their decomposing power, the earth would be possibly covered with dead organic matter, especially materials rich in lignin and cellulose. Now, let us look into the another example, that is photoheterotrophic cyanobacteria. So, photoheterotrophic cyanobacteria are a group of microorganisms that have superior photosynthetic efficiency and minimum growth requirements. These bacteria cannot use carbon dioxide as a source of carbon, but they can use solar energy for the transfer of electrons in the electron transport chain. They occur in aquatic or damp environments where they feed on the organic compounds produced by autotrophic aquatic organisms. These are increasingly studied due to their ability to produce large amount of energy, of course, by taking help of the solar light, or basically the sunlight. Okay. Now, the next example is iron reducing bacteria. So, iron reducing bacteria are bacteria that metabolize reduced iron to oxidized iron compounds to produce energy. The energy obtained from the process is then utilized for absorption of carbon source and metabolism. These bacteria have been proposed to be used for decontamination of metal or metalloid polluted environments. Even though iron reducing organisms are associated with extreme environments, these can occur in other areas as well. Next very common example is animals, human beings. So, now let us look on to the animals. So, animals make up the most important group of heterotrophs in the environment, as they occupy the maximum number of trophic levels in a food chain. All animals are heterotrophic, we know that very well, but their dependency on the autotrophs might differ, as some depend on autotroph while others are indirectly dependent. Herbivorous animals feed on autotrophic organisms like plants and phytoplanktons to obtain both energy as well as food. Carnivores in turn feed on herbivores, indicating their indirect dependency on the autotrophs. Next is amoeba. So, amoeba displays a holozoic mode of nutrition in which the organism is ingested as a whole and then absorbed by the body. The process by which amoeba displays a holozoic mode of nutrition involves few steps, which are ingestion, where the amoeba encircles the food with its pseudopodia. The food is then swallowed up by the process of phagocytosis. Digestion is the next process, where the food vacuoles, which are rich in digestive enzymes, are helped to break into simpler organic nutrients. The next process is absorption. Here, the digested nutrients are absorbed into the cytoplasm, leaving undigested materials behind. This absorbed food is used to generate energy for cell growth and development. Finally, by the process of egestion, where the undigested food is moved out or ejected from the cell by rupturing the cell membrane. Now, let us look into what is actually the role of heterotrophs in the food chain or how they exist in the food chain. So, heterotrophs are the largest group of living organisms in the food chain, occupying many trophic levels. The second trophic level is occupied by consumers that directly feed on autotrophs so as to begin the transfer of energy in the system. The heterotrophs on the third trophic level are secondary consumers that feed on primary consumers. Okay. So, these are basically more complex group of organisms that feed on organic compounds. Decomposers are another important group of organisms which live in higher trophic level in the ecosystem. These are essential group of heterotrophs that feed on dead and decaying materials, which we have already discussed in the previous slides, which basically is important to release the inorganic compounds back to the environment. Each trophic level is responsible for transferring 10% of the energy, while rest of the energy is stored in the trophic level as biomass. In a food chain, heterotrophs form a group of organisms that supply food and energy to the organism, to other organisms. So, like they are found at various levels in the food chain, like already discussed, secondary or tertiary consumers. A detrivore is another category of heterotrophic consumer. They feed on remnants of plants and animals as well as their fecal matter to get their nutrition. By recycling trash, detrivores contribute significantly for the preservation of a healthy ecosystem. Saprophytes reduce dead and decaying organic materials. They basically decompose them into less complex elements which can be easily absorbed by the plants, and it can be recycled. As a result, they are crucial to preserving ecological equilibrium. Symbiotic connections alter the physiology of the interacting partners and have an impact on their ecological dynamics and evolutionary process, and eventually change how the species are distributed on the earth. Additionally, parasites affect the behavior and fitness of host and have the power to control host population sizes, which can sometimes have significant effects on trophic relationships, food chains, competition, biodiversity and keystone species. These interactions imply that parasites play a significant role in determining the organization of communities and the ecosystems. Now, let us look into the importance of heterotrophs. First is food chain dynamics. So, as we have discussed in the previous, actually the first slide, heterotrophs are often known as the primary consumers, feeding on autotrophs through various processes. We already know that autotrophs are what? They are organisms that produce their own food through photosynthesis or chemosynthesis. Heterotrophs basically form the basis of food chain and food webs, transferring energy and nutrients from lower to higher trophic levels. Second importance is decomposition. So, all the saprophytes, detrivores, mostly they belong to the category of decomposers. They break down dead organic matter into simpler compounds. This process releases nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus and carbon back into the environment, making them available for use by other organisms present in the ecosystem. Third importance is nutrient cycling. So, through their feeding and metabolic activities, heterotrophs contribute to the cycling of nutrients within ecosystems. They take up nutrients from the environment, incorporate them into their biomass and then release them back into the environment upon death or through waste products. Next is symbiotic relationship. Heterotrophs engage in various symbiotic relationships with other organisms such as mutualism, where both the partners are benefited by each other, or parasitism, where one benefits at the expense of other. So, basically both mutualism and parasitism is very important. These relationships can have significant impacts on ecosystem dynamics and the health of individual organisms present. Next importance is energy flow. Heterotrophs play a critical role in the flow of energy through ecosystems. By consuming organic matter, they convert stored chemical energy into forms usable by themselves and other organisms, ultimately driving the ecosystem processes and maintaining the stability of an ecosystem. Now, let us look at the summary of heterotrophs. So, we have kept on discussing what is heterotroph, what are the examples, how they help to the environment, how they, even though they do not produce their own food, but how they basically benefit the environment and the ecosystem. All this was explained in the previous slides. So, basically heterotrophs are organisms that cannot produce their own food and instead rely on consuming organic matter produced by other organisms. They play crucial roles in ecosystems by serving as primary consumers, decomposers and participants in nutrient cycling. They play a very important role in constant cycling of nutrients. The energy flow in the food chain should be constant, it should be in a continuous mode. Heterotrophs are essential for transport and nutrients through food chain and food webs, contributing to ecosystem stability and biodiversity. They engage in various symbiotic relationships and help to derive the flow of energy through ecosystems. Overall, heterotrophs are fundamental to the functioning of ecosystems, playing key role in nutrient cycling, energy flow and maintaining the balance of ecosystem. Students, I hope you have inculcated some knowledge about heterotroph. Now, the topics in connection which will be discovered in the next lecture are introduction to growth and nutrition of microbes, features of microbes, what are the different mechanisms of microbial growth, factors affecting microbial growth, methods of controlling microbial growth and their summary. So, as every organism needs some factor for their growth and nutrition, similarly even microbes which play a very important role in the ecosystem, they also are associated with various growth and nutrition factors, similar like us, similar like human beings, oxygen, nitrogen, glucose, all the inorganic and organic sources. What are the different types of microbes, how the microbes grow using different factors, what are the different phases, what are the different 4 stages which are present, which are important for the growth of microorganisms, how the microorganisms can be controlled, all these topics which will be discussed in the next lecture.